Hello everybody and welcome to a video not about a gaming PC. What? No gaming PC? This is a gaming PC channel. I want to see Apex Legends. What's going on? If you're someone like me that actually uses their computer pretty much 90% of the time to actually be making something, be that video editing, photography, 3D modeling, you're going to want a computer that can actually keep up and isn't going to hold you back. So this is exactly why I'm incredibly excited to be building this ultimate computer for creators. We're going to go through all of the parts that were featured in this. We're going to talk about specifically why we're using them and the differences versus a gaming computer. We're going to be showing you the full build process to show you how difficult or easy this is to put together yourself, and of course show you exactly what this PC can do. We'll be going through a few different benchmarks, but also show you live exactly what this PC is capable of achieving. I am thrilled to announce that this video is actually sponsored by both Nvidia and Scan Computers, because in the last few years Nvidia has been pulling out all of the stops for creators with the creation of their studio program. And the awesome thing about this is that if you have absolutely no knowledge about PC parts at all, you don't know what's good for gaming, what's good for work, or what it is that you need, then the Studio badge can be found on both laptops and desktops that are actually sold through Scan Computers. So if you have certain applications, for example, I use DaVinci Resolve Studio, it can actually take advantage of some of the extra features that you get with these graphics cards that will not only give you a smoother experience, but in some cases it will make things possible that just otherwise wouldn't be. I'm a man that loves to do everything myself though, so let's talk components. Up first, we have our RTX 3060 Ti, and this is an Nvidia graphics card. It's actually amazing at gaming. I think this is pretty much my favorite GPU on the market right now, but for creators, this has pretty much all of the features that you're going to need and the performance horsepower to back it up. Unless you're working with something really high-end, I think this is going to be a great balance for pretty much most creators. For a creative PC, you're going to want a really powerful CPU as well. This is the Ryzen 5900X, and I've picked this because it actually has 12 cores, which usually for gaming wouldn't really make that much sense, especially with a 3060 Ti, as you'd always be GPU limited. But when you're working with applications, you really do want to have a decent CPU and graphics card so that it doesn't matter what you're doing, you always have plenty of performance at your disposal. You probably already noticed that the case we're using is definitely on the smaller side. This is actually ITX, but the thing that's cool about this, it's brand new from Phanteks, it's the P200A, is that it's pretty much a traditional tower shrunk down as much as possible. And this is actually a brilliant option because, as you can see from the front, you've got so much airflow that you're not going to have to worry about your thermals or anything, but you can still cram pretty much all of the hardware that you're actually going to use inside without wasting any space. There is one major downside for going to ITX though, and that is that you can only fit in 2 slots of RAM. So if this is something that's going to bother you, obviously you're going to need to go for M80X or larger. This is 32 gigabytes, so 2 times 16. You don't need it to be anywhere near as fast as this. 32 or 3600 megahertz should probably be fine, but for some reason the one I've got here is 4600 because we like to go big on this channel, or we go home. Except that this is my home, so I technically always go big and go home because I'm cool. The motherboard that we're using is B550, so this isn't actually the most expensive motherboard out there. It's ITX, it's from Gigabyte, it's the Aorus Pro AX, so we do have Wi-Fi 6 built in. There's plenty of features actually baked onto this board as well, things like PCI Generation 4 support, and then you've got an extra slot, I think, on the back, so you can have 2 M.2 SSDs. And actually, on that note, I would suggest really that you just go for a larger capacity SSD, unless you actively need Gen 4 storage now, because it is going to get cheaper over time. It's a really easy upgrade to make. So even though this is only a Gen 3 SSD. This is from Sabrent, it's the Rocket Q. If you don't need the speed, something like this is awesome. Power supply wise, we don't need anything too crazy, especially if you can't actually see inside your system. You can even get away with bad cable management. This is the TX650M. It's actually semi-modular, so some of the cables are pre-attached, some aren't. You don't have to use all of them. But fundamentally, 650 watts should be more than enough for this system. You don't really need to go for anything more unless you know you're going to upgrade to a 3090 later down the line. But realistically, I think this is probably a good choice for what we've got on the table here today. Which leaves us with, last but not least, the iQOO H100i Elite Capellix. I've used this before, it's a very good all-round liquid cooler. The 5900X can actually get quite hot if you don't have a decent cooling solution. You want something that can actually cope with all of the heats, but also do so in a way that isn't gonna, well, make an absolute racket. Trust me, it starts with a couple of RGB fans and then soon you've got a studio that's every color you can imagine, and the neighbors are wondering what on earth you're doing in there. They will never know unless you tell them. If you are new to this, then don't worry, it is actually pretty simple, especially I think in a chassis like this. I don't think it's going to cause you many problems. Do be aware that there is this little lever here that you need to lift up so you can actually drop the CPU into place. Grab your Ryzen chip, being very careful not to actually touch any of the pins, and find the little gold arrow that's at the bottom left-hand side of your processor. Line this up with the corresponding one that's on the motherboard, and then you just very gently lower it into place with no force. It should just drop down. And then you can close this, and here you have your installed CPU. RAM is just as easy, if not easier, to be honest with you, because you can't really damage anything very easily. 2 sticks, 2 slots. I think you can work this bit out. Just open up the slots, grab your RAM. There is only one right way of putting it in. So here it's wrong, the central groove is misaligned. So you just flip it around until that it fits in, and then with a fair bit of force, press it till it clicks. Your SSD actually sits underneath this very big heat shield here that actually takes some of the heat away from your SSD and allows it to have better sustained performance. But do be aware that you do also get another one around the back, but this is only Gen 3 speeds. Take your SSD and then line up the groove just like you did with the RAM so that that slots in. Then get your cover and you can screw the whole thing down as one. Remember that you will need 2 different sizes of screwdriver, one small and then one larger one. And then here we are, our completed motherboard combo. Pretty much everything is ready to go. We've got our CPU, our RAM, our storage, and then obviously the whole B550 motherboard itself. Next, we can prepare our case, and we get all of the accessories in this little cardboard box that just includes things like screws and cable ties, any sort of fixings really. Spin your case around and then remove this other tab that helpfully says pull here. Who's Paul? Paul's Hardware, are you hiding here again? Grab your case and put it down flat, then you can get your motherboard and you just drop it in the big hole. There are only 4 screws, so you can't really get confused at this bit. You'll then have something that resembles this. You can see the motherboard is actually very small, even in this case. It's definitely a big ITX chassis, one of the benefits of which, of course, being that you can actually fit a full-size radiator at the front of this. But this means that we do need to take this pre-installed fan out, as it is unfortunately in our way. Then we can get our lovely Capellix all-in-one. Probably is a little bit overkill for what we're doing here today, but if you were using the glass tempered panel, then this would look lovely. Installing the all-in-one liquid cooler is a bit annoying because it takes quite a lot of time and it's a bit fiddly, but it is pretty straightforward. All you're essentially doing is clamping the fans and the radiator together. You do need to make sure that you do actually set up the airflow correctly. So here we're using the fans to blow into the radiator and into the case. Do make sure all of the screws are tight, otherwise you'll get a little bit of a rattling noise, which can be pretty annoying. Because I've used this cooler before, I will actually need to add some thermal paste to actually conduct the heat from the processor and into the cooler. But if you're buying this new, you won't need to do this step as it actually does come pre-applied. Grab your AMD mounting hardware and then just slide this into the block. It's very easy to install this one, to be fair. Lower the cooler on top of your processor and then you have 2 hooks, one at the top and one at the bottom. And you're essentially just catching this in place and then screwing it down. The next thing is actually the power supply, and this is arguably the component I wouldn't say I'm worried about, but is potentially going to cause us some issues, because if the cables are really long, the whole thing is going to be a bit of a mess. Plug in our graphics card PCIe cables and then 1 SATA that we're going to use for our fan hub. And then rather unusually, this actually goes right here at the top in the bit that you can actually see rather than down the bottom like normal. So here's hoping it's simple. We grab the little bracket off of the back and then we screw this to the power supply and then slide the whole unit into place. To me, this does definitely look like a little bit of a challenge, but I think it's one that is doable because there is at least some cable management around the other side. You've got this little chamber up here and then a couple of grooves that go quite deep in here. At least with the version we've got here though, you're not going to be able to see inside anyway, so you can be as messy as you like. But that's not my style. I mean, my bedroom is, but this isn't. I sound like a child. I have my own house. And I'm still talking about my bedroom being a mess. I mean, to be fair, I am a child, really. I think you guys know that by now. We will start with the CPU cable that needs to feed all the way at the top right. So you're almost double backing on yourself a little bit. And if you can just about get your fingers in there, it's just this port over here in the top left-hand corner. I'll tell you what though, the problem with this power supply is that the cables are just so long. You've got all of this slack you're gonna have to hide in a bit. And I honestly think that it is going to be a bit of a nightmare. You've also got all of the cables for the front panel, so you've got things like the USB-C, this big blue connector. Something that is always going to be quite tricky though is your power switch, reset and any power LEDs that you might have. So here we have these tiny little connectors, one to say power switch on it, the other two say power LEDs, and you need to plug them in this little white connector here right underneath your ATX power supply. Once again, I would highly advise that you do actually check in your motherboard manual before you do this so you don't end up plugging it into the wrong place. Normally all of the case fans would actually plug into the motherboard itself, but on ITX boards you don't actually have many headers, you usually have to end up using splitters. But one of the good things about this CPU cooler is that it does actually come with this little hub, so you can plug both the RGB and the fan speed into this and everything is controlled over USB. Use the SATA connection that we plugged into our power supply earlier to hook this up. Plug the USB into the white port underneath the USB 3. Then we can plug in our RGB cables. As you can see, there are only 2 at the moment, but this is expandable up to 6. We've then got the connection from the pump itself that goes here at the top of this. And then finally, you've got those 3 fans, 1 at the back, 2 on the front. So just plug these in to 1, 2, and 3 accordingly. And that's pretty much your lot. Which neatly leaves us on to our final component, the NVIDIA graphics card, the 3060 Ti. Essential for PC gamers and pretty much a must-have for any serious editing PC. You can see that this is actually not the largest graphics card on the market. This case definitely can accommodate something a lot bigger, but if you're all about price to performance, this is the one to go for. We do need to unscrew 2 of these little covers at the back so that this can actually slot in. I was going to say don't throw away your screws, but who would throw away screws? That just seems wrong, right? Has anyone ever done that? Mine just end up sitting in my man drawer. And I would say if you're a lady watching this, then you could put it in your lady drawers, but then that sounds a little bit weird. Like all my videos. Welcome to the club, get subscribed. We're totally sane around here. One Zotac GPU, place it in, boom. There we go. Take your screws out of your lady drawers and then fix it back into the case to stop it wobbling around. The very last thing that we then need to do with this rig is actually get this graphics card plugged in. I think from the top is going to work best here. There is no point doing proper cable management until you've tested your rig, because otherwise you spend so long getting it neat and then if something doesn't work you have to undo it and start it all again. So here we are then, our very serious workhorse rig. What do you make of it? What do you think of the P200A? Do you think that this is actually the sort of system you would want, or would you rather it was a lot bigger or something a lot smaller? Let me know down in that comment section below as we grab some power cables and get this thing tested. Be sure to get yourself a copy of Windows if you're using a new drive and put this on a USB and then insert it in the back of your system. If you haven't already downloaded it, it's completely free from Microsoft. Yes, you'll need to buy a license, but most people are transferring it. But here we go, moment of truth. Will our system work? Are we cooking on gas? Have I made a mistake? Is it all gonna blow up in my face? I forgot that there wasn't any RGB on the RAM then. I was like, whoa, why has that not come alive? Well, that cooler certainly has. We've got some RGB on the front. We're definitely connected this time. I have confirmed this with the power socket down there. I mean, we're not getting anything just yet, which is definitely a little bit concerning, but there's still plenty of time. I think the problem was that actually this B550 motherboard is running an older BIOS, so it doesn't actually support the 5900X, but fortunately because this does actually have QFlash Plus on the back of the board, you can just insert the BIOS on a USB drive. There's a certain port, you just press QFlash Plus, then you get a little blinking orange light, and as soon as that goes out, you should be ready to rock and roll. It works! We have our completed system up and running. I've actually used this SSD before, so it's even jumped into Windows for me. I'm really pleased with how this has come out, to be honest with you. Yes, it is definitely not going to be for everybody. I think there are going to be plenty of people that will want it one way or the other when it comes to size. But regardless, I think it's a pretty clever system. Let me know your thoughts on it down in the comment section below. But shall we actually touch on performance? Hello and welcome then to our completed workstation setup. You can see everything is all very neat and tidy. We have our small little system, 4K monitor, pretty good pairings. Before you get started, make sure you're running the NVIDIA Studio drivers from GeForce Experience, as these are properly certified to work with all of the creative apps. It's very similar to how it works with the Game Ready drivers, but obviously when you're using creative applications, you want to focus on stability rather than having that latest driver for the latest game release. this. We're going to start off with where I spend most of my life, DaVinci Resolve, and here you can see we have a little bit of an edit from a previous video. This was my Alienware review, and this is actually 6K footage, so what we're doing here is decoding 6K RAW. We are actually using a couple of different color nodes as well on a few different clips to just make it a little bit better. We're bypassing them at the moment, but we'll enable them, and then you can see everything does start to pop a little bit. And the reason that I personally use Resolve Studio with an NVIDIA GPU is because playing back all of this footage and scrubbing through it is just ridiculously smooth. But not only can you play back one of these clips, you can actually have two feeds going at the same time, running window in window, and you can see we're actually able to decode these absolutely no problem at all. When it does come to rendering as well, you do actually have the NVIDIA encoder and decoder, but as soon as we hit render, you can see we're actually processing at around about 65 frames a second, which really isn't too bad. That's around about double real-time speed. Bearing in mind you've got all of this going on under the hood, this software is quick. Whilst Photoshop Lightroom isn't the most demanding application that I have in my suite, it still can be quite difficult, especially if you are using very high-resolution files. But this is also another application that is GPU accelerated. So just by adjusting the sliders, if you want to get in there and really improve something with some brushes and things, then having GPU acceleration can help here as well, as it can make the whole process just feel a whole lot smoother. If you're a gamer, you probably heard the term ray tracing. It's all the rage right now, especially with the NVIDIA RTX features in games. You can get real-time ray tracing and games will look better than ever. But did you know that it's actually been around for a whole lot longer than video games, and it's actually used in 3D modeling software? What you're seeing here is clearly a very complex scene, but the crazy thing about this is that you can actually move the camera around and then it will dynamically re-render the scene, or at least give you a decent preview before you do your final output. If you try to do this on just the Ryzen CPU alone with a different process, then it's just nowhere near as smooth, and you just won't really be able to get the same amount of work done. It's a very different workflow, I guess. You have to move the camera and then wait ages for it to render in, and then make another adjustment and then another, whereas here you can quite literally move the camera around and then let the GPU pretty much do all of the work. And that's just the preview. As soon as it comes to actually output your final piece, it is so much quicker on the GPU, it is ridiculous. You have the ray tracing, you have the denoising, all of this happens so much better when it's GPU accelerated. The difference is quite literally night and day. All in all, this is one mighty impressive package. Obviously for me, this would be able to cope with my daily workflow with both Resolve and Lightroom, no problems there, even with the 6K files. Let me know your thoughts though on this PC, and of course all of the NVIDIA Studio stuff. If you do want to grab one yourself, then you can head over to Scan. You can either look at the parts or one of their pre-built studio systems that will actually be set up and ready to go for you. If you want to check out current pricing on anything featured in this video, then as always you can find them linked down below. But thank you so much for watching this, I really appreciate it. I'll see you in the next one.